Got a pretty interesting one here today. Got these beautiful citrus trees, Valencia orange and the ruby red grapefruit, both looking really happy, really healthy, and that's because I've been taking care of them for a couple years now. Unfortunately, I've reached peak capacity on all the care, and I may have taken it a little too far. And because of that, we've got pretty big consequences. Might not look bad, might actually look really good, but there are problems under the surface. So let's talk about some of the things that can go wrong when you over-fertilize your citrus trees. Let me start by saying taking care of these trees over the past 7 years has been really rewarding. They used to not really produce any fruit, they did not look good, and they were barely growing. And today they are lush, beautiful, blossoming trees. However, through mulching, throwing compost, and fertilizing, it's finally reached its boiling point. So let's start with the first problem, albeit the maybe least significant one. These trees are too big for their space. Having the biggest fruit tree in the world isn't necessarily the best thing. It can make it really difficult to get to the fruit at the top and the middle of the tree, but also it's completely blocked my walking path. It's easy to solve this through pruning. However, it can get pretty annoying, as you'll see towards the end of the video. Which brings us to problem number 2. Too much fruit. And I know this might sound kind of clickbaity and stupid, but trust me, this is a real problem. You don't want your trees to get into this boom-bust cycle where you've got 150 grapefruits one year, which, let's be real, is way too much grapefruit, and then 10 to 20 grapefruit the next year. You want a consistent yield every single year. And on top of that, sometimes if your tree isn't necessarily that healthy or it's not nearly that big, it will not produce all 150 of those fruit at an exceptional homegrown flavor. They might not have as much sugar and so on. Which brings us to our final, most disappointing fact of all. Over-fertilizing your citrus trees can destroy the fruit. When citrus gets too much fertilizer, mainly nitrogen, the rinds can become very, very hard and the fruit can just lack sugar. In the case of these oranges, I don't know how many there are, I'm not going to count. There might be 200 and some odd oranges on this tree. They're almost completely inedible. You could eat them, but it would be a massive disappointment. They lack sugar, they lack flavor, and even the texture is a little different. I've read a decent amount about the timing of fertilizing, and I'm sure it plays a pretty big part in this. However, I think these trees just need, in general, a fertilizer diet. Specifically talking about the Valencia orange tree, Valencias can suffer from something called citrus regreening, and this is not to be confused with the disease carried by the Asian citrus psyllid, the Huanglong Bing disease, which I'm 100% sure I butchered the pronunciation of. Valencia oranges just happen to suffer from this phenomenon. Believe me, I was panicking that this was the HLB disease, but there's no bitterness in the fruit, there's no weird misshapen fruit, and the tree itself is as happy and healthy as I've probably ever seen it. So this just leaves normal citrus regreening, and the Valencias are really bad with this. The oranges lose chlorophyll in the winter, and unfortunately, because of the time of the ripening being later on in the spring, specifically in my area, the heat begins to set in and the fruits begin to take up more chlorophyll and they regreen. Excessive amounts of nitrogen in the soil make this an even bigger problem, and the citrus regreening gets pretty bad. And that pretty much sums it up. One very disappointing fruit harvest, an absolutely ridiculous amount of inedible oranges, a massive prune job, and back to square one, waiting for that next crop. I hope this inspires you to take a holistic approach when dealing with your fruit trees. Definitely consider whether you've been fertilizing in the past, how often, whether you've been adding compost and mulch and all these things that in general are good for the trees. You know, every once in a while consider taking a little break. And this is also dependent on where you are in your tree's life. If it's just a bunch of growth that you're looking for so you can get the tree healthy and established, then I would say go crazy. But if you want delicious, incredible harvests and a tree that's well managed and an appropriate size, then consider not fertilizing this year. All right, hopefully you learned something and you enjoyed this video. If you've got any advice for me, feel free to leave it in the comments, maybe any experiences you've had, and hopefully you like this enough to subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I'll see you again.